I'm going to give some background and on how decisions are made about the allocation of resources. We've seen this happening in the environment of COVID, and we're going to actually do some simulations practicing using these kind of decision-making processes. And the point I'm trying to make is that while these decisions may be ethically and philosophically justified, they aren't always going to feel right or fair to those of us, especially if we're the people being denied care that we think we need or deserve. I'm going to say right off as a disclaimer, I am not a philosopher, I'm not an ethicist, and I am profoundly thankful that I am neither. I'm also not a skilled PowerPoint creator, especially when I'm hurrying, and I apologize in advance for some of the quality of the slides you're going to see today. But I'm going to move on past that, and I'm ready to start my presentation. So let's take a look at utilitarianism. It's an ethical philosophy which commonly guides healthcare decision-making. Utilitarianism is a moral principle. It holds that the morally right course, the correct course of action in any situation, is the course of action that produces the greatest balance of benefits over harms for everyone who's affected. So long as a course of action produces maximum happiness and well-being for everyone, utilitarianism does not care how it is achieved, or even if some individuals are harmed. We sometimes, and I think this is a great simplification, but we sometimes simplify this philosophy with the statement, the greatest good or the greatest number. And I think you've all heard that before. Utilitarianism asks us to consider the immediate and the less immediate consequences of our actions. Because it sums up together the benefits and harms of all the people involved, utilitarianism requires that we look beyond our self-interest and consider impartially the interests of everybody affected by our choices of actions. There are 7 general rules of thumb that are commonly used when applying utilitarian principles to decision-making, and I promise we will come back and look at this when we need to. The first rule of thumb is number. With other factors being equal, the object of utilitarianism is to benefit the greatest number. Another one is length. And in this case, because it's healthcare, we're talking about length of life. So it's how long a benefit lasts that's important. Quality of life is the third one. How well a person lives is equally as important as how long they live. Equivalence of acts and omissions. And this means it doesn't really matter how you get to the outcome. You can get to the outcome by an action or by refraining from acting. The fifth one is social benefit. All the consequences of actions or inactions, they're both choices are okay, must be considered, both for the short term and the long term, both for direct outcomes and for indirect outcomes. The sixth rule of thumb is responsibility. As decision makers, what we want as an outcome is not relevant. Decision makers are responsible for what we could or should have foreseen, as well as for the actual outcomes. And the seventh and last one is to avoid bias. Emotions and beliefs have no place in problem solving. Decisions that we make have to be based on facts and evidence. So this is our scenario. Today, in order to get some practice using utilitarianism to see how healthcare decisions are made, we're going to pretend that all of us here in the auditorium today are members of the Hospital Ethics Committee at a large urban hospital a couple of years ago as the COVID pandemic was in full swing. Our hospital's resources, of course, have been stretched to the limit. Our supplies are running low, members of our staff are coming down sick, and staff members who are healthy are putting in long overtime hours, and they are not happy about that. So us, the Ethics Committee, we're responsible for allocating our limited resources for use with an ever-increasing number of severely ill patients. So here's our first decision we have to make, and I want you to please think this over, and then I'm going to give some little pauses so we can type our answers into local chat. And I want you to not just type yes or no or whatever, but I want you to give your justification or your reasoning. And you can just give one of the numbers for rules of thumb, or you can say it in a sentence or a phrase. And you're also encouraged to agree or disagree with each other because this is a committee. So we're going to talk to each other, and if they disagree with us, we're going to try and convince them. Because we have to come up with a decision that the majority of us can agree with. Okay, so this is our scenario. Two patients are now in the emergency room. Both patients are in respiratory failure after testing positive for COVID. Adrian, the first patient, is 60 years old. Before she got COVID, she was recovering from, but she was still under treatment for moderate chronic obstructive airway disease. The other patient is Bernard. He's 35 years old. He's been healthy up until now. And he apparently contracted COVID while he was traveling abroad. Unfortunately, the hospital only has one remaining respirator. Which of these two patients should get it, and why? And I'm going to pause here for decision making while you think about it and type your choice into nearby chat. Let's see what we come up with. This is an A or B choice, Adrian or Bernard. Who gets the ventilator and why? Okay, Marcus points out that Adrian sounds at higher risk of death due to COPD and age. So, are you saying Adrian gets the ventilator or Bernard gets the ventilator, Marcus? Who gets the ventilator? Oh, Marcus thinks Adrian should get it because she has a higher risk of death because of her respiratory condition and her age. Do you guys agree or disagree with Marcus's giving the ventilator to Adrian? Mook wouldn't choose between them yet. There's not enough information about either of them. Age and brief state of health is not enough. Mook needs to know more. Idiko agrees with Mook. Okay, let's back at the rules of thumb. We can't save both of them, so number one doesn't apply. Marcus has a bias. His husband is older and has COPD and is on oxygen, and he's basically Adrian. Orange, yes. Length of life does mean length of remaining life. Lauren says that's a painful choice, but yes, this is the kind of choice that is sent to hospital ethics committees every single day. And Lauren is saying he would give the ventilator to Adrian, but because of age, and it would be better to have more established information. Peko says if it's a triage situation, you could argue that Bernard has a longer life ahead. Iara says Bernard because the effect of saving him staying alive, will statistically last longer. Jenna admits that's why she would never serve on such a board. James wants to know, did Bernard take precautions when traveling? Is there a merit consideration? Orange says Bernard, based on just the information we have, because he has a longer length of life possible. Slayton says maybe Adrian is alone while Bernard has a family. Again, more information is necessary. Lauren says, Bernard would pay more taxes in the future. That is actually a consideration. Limerick says Bernard, intervention is more likely to have a successful outcome. You mean because Adrian was already ill? Is that why you're saying that, Limerick? Oh, James wants to know who's insured. Right? These are definitely. And Limerick says younger and not having a pre-existing condition. Okay. So we're going to go back to thinking about Adrian and Bernard. According to rule of thumb number 2, if we go expected length of life, we should send Bernard up to be put on the respirator because he's younger and likelier to live longer. But that's not the only criterion. As a committee, you are allowed to ask for additional information. Mook started that. Several of you agreed with Mook. Perhaps that will help us to feel more comfortable with our decision about Adrian and Bernard. So we requested additional information about these two patients so we can better understand their situations and decide who should get the respirator. What if the doctors in the ER, after evaluating both patients, state that Bernard has a 90% chance of recovery, but Adrian only has a 10% chance of recovery? How should we decide then, and why? Orange asks, do we mean recovery on his own or with the ventilator? With the ventilator. Marcus changed his mind to Bernard because of the resource allocation. James said years of life would benefit more people. Any kind of bias is not a good thing, Orange. Lauren says, we also do not know whether either of them active proactively and had been vaccinated. Orange is arguing to Lauren that that doesn't matter. Why doesn't that matter, Orange? And why do you think it should matter, Lauren? Orange says that it shouldn't matter because all we know is we have 2 very sick patients. Past decisions about how they got sick are irrelevant. And Lauren says it should matter since they could have reduced the severity of the symptoms. So putting some responsibility on Adrian and Bernard. Marcus says when it comes to organ transplants, lifestyle matters. Luke says percentage of recovery is a very powerful point. If no more information is forthcoming, Bernard would seem the choice, but she still wants more information is if possible, but at this point she's choosing B. Idiko says he would much rather support someone who takes precautions than someone who's lazy with their own safety. Okay, so we're going to go back to Adrian and Bernard. According to rule of thumb number 1, with the amount of effort it would likely take to save Adrian's life, you could have saved 9 people like Bernard. That's the statistics. Oh, come on. For some reason, my speakeasy has decided it does not want to work. Let me get my script out. I'm going to give my script to our transcriptionists. Okay, based on rule of thumb number 1, save the greatest number, Bernard still gets the ventilator. And there's yet another way to look at this choice. Adrian is likely going to need to be on the ventilator for a month. Bernard should be able to be weaned off it in a week. What would be your decision if this were the case? If Adrian needed to be on the ventilator for a month, but Bernard only needed to be on it for a week. Marcus is staying with Bernard, but unhappy about it. Orange doesn't like this game. Yeah, unfortunately, it's not a game, Orange. It's a real-life situation. Lauren is leaning more toward Bernard now that more information is in there. James gives that a point for Bernard. Idiko points out the doctors don't like it much either. Pecos hopes that during that week you could find more ventilators. Slayton could both share the ventilator. Do you know what, Slayton? They actually tried that, and it did not work very well. Good try, though, Slayton. So the same choice, basically, Bernard gets the ventilator. Most of you are agreeing. By greater good, we have to go with B. According to rule number 1, you could treat 3 additional patients after Bernard on that ventilator during the time it might have been used only for Adrienne. Oh, orange. How nice. It would be great if you got all the information at once, wouldn't it? Before you have to make a decision. But we're not done yet. We keep getting more information. So here's some more information. Because of her ongoing obstructive airway disease, it will take 3 more staff members to care for Adrienne while she is on the ventilator, while it only would require 1 staff member to care for Bernard. Does this change your decision? Or does it firm up your choice? Takes 3 people to take care of Adrienne, only 1 to take care of Bernard. Marcus had it reinforced, Bernard, his choice. Slayton's voting for Bernard. Lauren's voting for Bernard. Yeah, Gemma, imagine having this to be your job every day. Nightmarish. Okay, so far we seem to be pretty much in agreement about who gets the respirator, but we have some other criteria to consider. So let's look a little deeper, make sure we're comfortable with our decision. And Idiko is also living with someone who's chronically ill. Here we go. Adrienne is a very competent, well-liked doctor who's been working in our hospital. Most of us know her pretty well. Right, Lauren. She contracted COVID while caring for critically ill patients. Bernard, on the other hand, is a businessman whose success may be due to his never take no for an answer approach to negotiation. He isn't really well respected in the business sector, and there are often negative comments about his actions in the news. Can we apply rule of thumb number 3 or number 5? Might this information about social benefits affect your decision as to who should get the 1 remaining ventilator? Social benefits of the person remaining alive to help others. James hopes Star Trek has solved this. Oh, Marcus says 0.7 trumps 0.5. But Idiko says we don't know the 2 other people we might save along with B. Orange is back to eeny, meeny, miny, mo. And Mook says to Orange, the problem with information is that it rarely comes all at once in a package. It takes time and digging and comes piecemeal. The situation in this game is unfortunately just as nasty as it would be in the physical world. Electra says Star Trek would have someone come up with a revolutionary alternative cure. Yep. Orange is flapping between different decisions. Right. That's a problem. It's getting harder and harder to make those decisions, isn't it? The more information we have. It goes, this game is actually easier because we're not being pressured from our colleagues. This is true because the two doctors that are dealing with the two patients in the ER are saying, come on, we got to know who to send up. And we have to decide as quickly as possible based on our limited information. Oh, you're cute, Mook. Maybe you were just fidgeting because the decisions were tough. Okay, we've just found out that Bernard is a big donor to our hospital foundation. We don't want to lose him just so we can save our own doctor. And yes, Rhiannon, this is definitely like the trolley philosophical dilemma. And Yara wants to know if B's business is making ventilators. Lauren, is that no answer to that? Should we save Bernard because he's a donor? A donor to our financial well-being as a hospital. Ah, okay. Electra's passing chamomile tea around so we can calm down a little bit. We're just passing the bourbon. Is that information about Bernard causing anyone to change their vote? Oh, Marcus says Adrian would advocate for Bernard. Interesting. Amy wants to know why she might do that. Lauren reminds us that should not enter into an ethical equation. James said because favoring a donor seems biased. Would not a big donation help us to buy more ventilators? See, these are not easy. Oh, Marcus said she would say that because she wants to save lives. Orange says it seems biased on the surface, but there's the concept of money aiding the hospital, benefiting the hospital as a whole. Maybe there's a way we could save both Adrian and Bernard. Oh, Yara wants to know if buying more ventilators for our hospital would make less ventilators available to other hospitals. Of course, it absolutely would. Rhiannon says favoring Adrian as being a doctor of the hospital should be just as important or not as Bernard is a big donor. They both have bias. So let's think maybe Game of Thrones is more apt than Star Trek. So let's think if there's a way we could save both of them. We've had a report from the COVID ward of our hospital that Casper, who was one of our very earliest COVID patients, Casper's been on a ventilator for 2 months so far. Casper was admitted from a nursing home where he was in the end stages of dementia. Casper was in a coma when he came in. He's still in a coma. He's been in a coma before and after COVID. Might we decide Casper has a lower quality of life than either Bernard or Adrian? Remember, quality of life was one of those rules of thumb. He was in a coma. He's still in a coma. He's not going to be out of a coma until he dies. Lauren wants God to bless the medical professionals who deal with decisions like this on a daily basis. Idico says he doesn't think that's within the rights of an ethics board. Imagine the family only has that right. Actually, it is within the rights of the ethics board. Should we consider taking Casper off the ventilator he's been in for so long in order to try to save both Bernard and Adrian? And yes, that would be called freeing up resources. Of course, he will die sooner than he would have died just laying in his coma in the nursing home without COVID. Is that okay? Pickles said we could ask Casper's representatives if they approve. Orange reminds us he was going to die anyway. He had no chance of recovery. Marcus says suddenly the words "do no harm" seems very, very complicated. Oh, James, you're asking a good question. Is there a hospital policy on length of treatment? Idico says it's not quote unquote okay, but these decisions are getting even harder, aren't they? Hippocrates is rolling in his grave. Luckily, Hippocrates didn't have to deal with this. Orange says the harm to Casper has already been done. You mean because he's terminal, whether or not he stays on a ventilator. Okay, got it. Things are getting tricky. It's really difficult to judge quality of life, which is rule number 3. Most people would agree that permanent unconsciousness was a very low quality of life. But where do you draw the line? What quality of life is too low to try to save? How would you define the quality of life that is too low to try to save? And I think Idico and Marcus have quite a bit to say about that. Orange says if you can't interact with your environment because you're not conscious, that's about as low as it gets. Marcus says if he's ultimately terminal, lesser evil will be good of the many. Lauren wants to know if there are dreams. Agonizing, it's truly horrific. Jim has come to the conclusion, no wonder so many people leave the medical field. Rhiannon reminds us we can also look at brain activity. Ooh, Iara says, did Casper write dispositions about that before being unable to? This is why you write out your wishes while you're still healthy and can write them. Orange says someone who was in a coma generally doesn't have much brain activity, do they? Yeah, Electra, not just your will, but you want power of attorney, power of medical decision making, all that kind of stuff. You need to do that now. And this is exactly why. A person with a disability doesn't necessarily have a lower quality of life than a person without a disability, and we have to fight for that. So now let's add one more twist to this scenario. Slayton says permanent unconsciousness was a very low quality of life. What do we know exactly? Okay. Our hospital is a Catholic hospital. We have to remember that. We find out that Adrian is a lesbian, and that one of the charities that Bernard supports financially is an abortion clinic. Does this change our thinking about how to allocate that one ventilator? Why not, Marcus? Slayton sees it getting more and more complex. Orange says we need to ignore both of those pieces of information because they create bias. James agrees, no. Marcus says, yeah, that's definitely bias. Lauren agrees with Orange. But we're a Catholic hospital. Life is not lifestyle. Orange says it does not matter. Raymond says, regarding your wishes, a good starting point is the 5 wishes. That's a very good resource right there that she's given you a link. Please click that link, the 5 wishes link, and save it for later. It's used often at some hospitals, but as I've told you, you have to have these things in place before you need them. And Orange is agreeing with James. The decisions just get harder and harder. I mean, in the beginning we said we needed more information to make the decision easier to make, and now that we've got more information, it's actually getting harder. Rule of thumb number 7 says we're to avoid bias. That is hard to do as individuals, but it's even harder sometimes for institutions. I really do not envy hospital ethics committee members. They're very heavy responsibilities. I'd like to close by sharing with you a tool that has been developed at many healthcare institutions to deal with the sort of decision making we just role played. It is called a triage tree. It's an ethical algorithm for dealing with rationing care. And Rena was a health proxy for a friend with cancer, and it came to the time for her hospice and death, and it was so important that we knew her decisions about all those things. It's a good way to think about it. There's a copy of this image in the giver box that I hope is up front here. I can't see that, but I hope it is. It's pretty tiny on this slide, so I tried to enlarge pieces of it so you could read it as I explained the decision-making, the process. So the diagram is a flow chart. It has decision points and choices in boxes. And this slide here is an enlargement of the very top of the chart. We're going to read from the top down, basically. Notice that the white diamond shows our situation. We've got limited resources. That's almost always true. And that leads to the first decision about a particular patient. Does this patient meet the threshold value of a life worthy of attempting to save? We have to admit we cannot save everyone we try to, but should we at least try? The inputs here are quality of life, and in most cases that is measured by cognitive function, brain function. And it also is expected length of life. And in this general rule is that we expect them to live greater than 5 years if we can save them. What this means is that in the initial stage of decision making, somebody in a coma, or somebody with end-stage renal disease, or somebody, even if they're totally healthy, if they're in advanced age, they would be judged to not pass the threshold value. We're not even going to try. Those persons are given no treatment other than supportive care. That's the blue box up there. They'll be put in hospice. Continuing on down a little bit, for those persons who do meet the threshold value, but that we should try and save, the next step is additional screening, which is called triage. Triage because it is going to divide people into 3 groups. In order to save the most lives, rule of thumb number 1, remember, we next need to consider the individual's probability of surviving and the duration of their treatment. And this is indicated by the yellow diamond. That's another big decision point. Notice the inputs to this decision. And those inputs are comorbidities. That's other types of diseases or situations, physical condition that they have. Frailty, age, and disability. Those are all determinants of a person's probability of survival. And there are 3 potential categories that you might fall into. Some people are in the low category. That's on the left side, the little blue box on the left side, because we have a high confidence that they have a low probability of survival. We don't think they're going to survive, even if we treat them. On the other hand, some people are in a high category. That's the right side blue box at the bottom. We would have high confidence that they have a high probability of survival. We think if we treat them, they'll probably survive. But I think the largest group is the middle group. That's the moderate category. These are people that we're kind of uncertain about, don't have enough information, I guess, or we can determine that they have a moderate probability of survival. So those are the 3 groups that the people are put into in triage. Moving down the chart, we're going to look at what happens to people in the low category. And actually, it's the same as those people who do not meet the initial threshold. We offer them supportive care, but we don't offer them any treatment. That's that dark blue box below the light blue box on the lower left side. We don't think treating them is going to do anything for them. On the other hand, for those individuals in the high category, we want to try out our best treatment on them to the extent of our insufficient resources, because they have the most likely chance of surviving. It's the large, moderate group where the really tricky decisions have to be made. We prioritize them by what it would take to maximize their quality of life. Especially with insufficient resources, there's really not much we can do. And notice that if there are insufficient resources, even all the folks in the high category may not get treatments. They're going to get prioritized as well, but by what it would take to maximize their quality of life. Do you see that? Some of them come over to the moderate category. In the moderate group, which now has actually been enlarged to include people out of the high group for whom there were insufficient resources to treat, so that group just got bigger, we now prioritize healthcare workers the highest. That's rule of thumb number 5, social benefit. We talked about that when we talked about Adrian being one of our doctors. If there are leftover resources available, then the next group to receive them would be people who have dependents that they have to take care of. and other people who have high social worth. Can you see how this gets contentious? Agonizing, too. How is social worth defined? And I'm not going to ask you to answer that question. That's a rhetorical question. But you can see how difficult that is. Mook has already left the council. She resigned. And Orange remembers that we had the question, who has higher social worth, a doctor or someone who donates to a hospital? And finally, after all of that, if there are any resources remaining, everybody else in that moderate group is in a lottery, so that we let chance determine if they get a treatment or if they only get supportive care. Lauren would quit out of desperation. But there is one other decision to make, and that takes us back to the very first group to get treatment. If after trying the treatment on an individual in the first group that we thought had high chance of effectiveness of the treatment, if that patient appears to recommend, if that patient isn't progressing, we can recommend that the treatment be withdrawn and they only get supportive care. I think I wrote that wrong, but you understand that. So that's how you read that algorithm chart. You've got a copy of it. I think you can see how some people might not like the decisions that the ethics committee comes up with in your particular individual case. But someone has to make those difficult decisions to allocate scarce life-sustaining equipment and overworked staff. And it's best to have a process worked out in advance that those decision makers can rely on. Orange throws himself off the cliff. If you're interested in learning more about how utilitarianism and ethics play into healthcare decision making, be sure to check out the poster display that's over on Health Info Island. It's called Healthcare, Ethics, and Utilitarianism, and there's the swirl to it. Orange makes sure the cliff is high enough that he isn't going to need a hospital at the bottom. And there's a landmark to that swirl in the giver box as well, I hope, if I did it right. So we can attempt a Q&A now, but I'm going to say, I will remind you, I'm not an expert in this stuff. Thank you for your attention and interest this afternoon. Well, guys, you do have to make this decision. You have to make this decision before you write your end-of-life statements. But that's only for you. That's right. You have to make the decision for you, not for anybody else. And yes, Sue Ellen, it does remind you, if you've already done this once, you still need to update it. Goodbye, thank you for coming. It's a lot easier. I mean, it's hard to make this decision for yourself, but it's easier to make it for yourself than to make it for anyone else. Slayton asks, is this algorithm made for the paying system USA or set up on the universal health care? Costs are totally different for both parts, patient and hospital. Slayton is just a general system that is used by many hospitals. I don't know if it's related to the paying system or not. Marcus starts donating money to hospitals and getting a medical degree. Luke, you're going to give yourself a headache. Be careful. Oh, and Gemma, you're right. You do have to hope that the person, I mean, if you're unable to express your desires about this, you have to hope that they will follow what you've written on paper. And even Nightfire says that this kind of stuff goes on all day at a military battlefield hospital. They have minutes or even seconds to make these decisions. Sue Ellen had to make these decisions for her mother. Very difficult decisions to make for someone else. Okay, I think we're done. Thank you all for your attention.